नमो ब्रह्मादिभ्यो ब्रह्मविद्या संप्रदायकर्तृभ्यो वंश ऋषिभ्यो महद्भ्यो नमो गुरुभ्यः। सर्वोपप्लवरहितः प्रज्ञानघनः प्रत्यगर्थो ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि ब्रह्मैवाहमस्मि। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। ॐ पूर्णमदः पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। ॐ ईशावास्यमिदं सर्वं यत्किञ्च जगत्यां जगत् तेन त्यक्तेन भुञ्जीथा मा गृधः कस्य स्विद्धनं कुर्वन्नेवेह कर्माणि जिजीविषेच्छतं समाः। एवं त्वयि नान्यथेतोऽस्ति न कर्म लिप्यते नरे। असुर्या नाम ते लोका अन्धेन तमसावृताः तांस्ते प्रेत्याभिगच्छन्ति ये केचात्महनो जनाः। अनेजदेकं मनसो जवीयो नैनद्देवा आप्नुवन् पूर्वमर्षत् तद्धावतोऽन्यानत्येति तिष्ठत् तस्मिन्नपो मातरिश्वा दधाति। तदेजति तन्नैजति तद्दूरे तद्वन्तिके तदन्तरस्य सर्वस्य तदु सर्वस्यास्य बाह्यतः। यस्तु सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मन्येवानुपश्यति सर्वभूतेषु चात्मानं ततो न विजुगुप्सते। यस्मिन् सर्वाणि भूतानि आत्मैवाभूद्विजानतः तत्र को मोहः कः शोक एकत्वमनुपश्यतः। सपर्यगाच्छुक्रमकायमव्रणम् अस्नाविरं शुद्धमपापविद्धं कविर्मनीषी परिभूः स्वयंभूर्याथा तथ्यतोऽर्थान् व्यदधाच्छाश्वतीभ्यः समाभ्यः। अन्धन्तमः प्रविशन्ति ये विद्यामुपासते ततो भूय इव ते तमो य उविद्यायाग्रताः। अन्यदेवाहुर्विद्यया अन्यदाहुरविद्यया इति शुश्रुमधीराणां येनस्तद्विचचक्षिरे विद्यां चाविद्यां च यस्तद्वेदो भयं सः अविद्यया मृत्युं तीर्त्वा विद्ययामृतमश्नुते अन्धन्तमः प्रविशन्ति ये सम्भूतिमुपासते ततो भूय इव ते तमो य उसम्भूत्यागुङ्रताः अन्यदेवाहुः सम्भवात् अन्यदाहुरसम्भवात् इति शुश्रुमधीराणां येनस्तद्विचचक्षिरे सम्भूतिं च विनाशं च यस्तद्वेदो भयं सः विनाशेन मृत्युं तीर्त्वा सम्भूत्यामृतमश्नुते हिरण्मयेन पात्रेण सत्यस्यापि हितं मुखं तत्त्वं पूषन्नपावृणु सत्यधर्माय दृष्टये ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः. So this Upanishad which started with the idea of Purna, Purnamadah Purnamidam, the infinite which fills up everything, the infinite which fills up everything. And now as we proceed towards the end, this idea of death comes. And they are mutually contradicting idea, because death is finite. It is an end of something. And infinities, which is not finite. How does a person understand these two ideas? Both have been expressed in this Upanishad, and this last section is about death. And to understand this, let me give an example, a mathematical example. In mathematics, there are various kinds of infinities. One is the well-known infinity of the numbers. You can have infinite numbers on both sides, which if we start from 0, can have -1, -2, -3 backwards. You can have infinite numbers and 1, 2, 3, 4, infinite. So you have infinite numbers. But then there is another kind of infinity which is more tricky to understand because it is the infinity that lies within two finite reference points, within something that is limited. And that is the most amazing thing, that even though it is limited, even within that, a person finds infinity. And that is the infinity that is there, for example, between 0 and 1. Can keep on dividing it, dividing it, dividing it, dividing it, and can have infinite numbers as well within those two numbers. So even though there is a limitation is clearly 1, 0, 1, or 1, 2. There is this limitation, and yet within this limitation again, when a mathematician, not a common person, because a common person can only realize the infinity of 1 to infinite numbers, but it requires a thinker, a mathematician, to become aware of the infinity that lies within that limitation. And the same is true about anything, because mathematics is a description of this reality, of this world out there. It is probably the best description that ever came up to describe the reality, to describe the truth. And so it makes us aware that anything that seems to have a limit, anything that seems to have an edge, if a person goes deeper within that, then even within that, a person will find the same infinity which is there out of that limitation. And the ancient mystics of India, they became aware of these two types of infinities in the sense that the yogis became aware of the infinity that was within them. That is, sometimes they call the infinity that is as big as a thumb. Angushthamatraha purushaha. The Upanishads speak about it, because that is the reason of the heart. This much. So when a person meditates on the heart chakra, as it is in the tantric traditions, it is referred to it in that way, what the Upanishads call hridayakasha, the space within the heart, which from outside it seems it is just this big. Look, from somebody else's area, it's just this big. Angushthamatraha, it is just as big as one thumb. And yet, what resides within it is again the infinite. This is difficult to understand, but the mathematical example that I gave makes it clear, makes it easy to comprehend. The yogis, through asana, pranayama, meditation, through entering within themselves, they were the explorers of the internal infinity. And that is why how much importance Patanjali gives to the idea of infinity, that when he speaks of mastery on asanas, then he adds sthira sukham asanam prayatna shaithilya ananta samapattibhyam, to acquire a state of mind which is completely colored by the infinite, or by infinity. Already he has not spoken about meditation, he has not even spoke about retention, he has not spoken about dhyana, he has not spoken about samadhi. He's just speaking about asana. He has not even spoken about pranayama. He's just speaking about asana. Already he introduces the idea of the infinite, the idea of the infinity there. Yoga has a very practical approach, which was part of these Upanishadic teachings, which also make us aware of the infinity out there. And so these two words that we listen so often, Brahman and Atman, the universal self and the inner self, they refer to the universal infinity, to the infinity out there. Brahman is the infinity out there, and Atman is the infinity within. Are there really two infinities? Or is it just because our mind has created this limitation between 0 and 1, and yet within it is infinity, and without there is infinity, and because reality ultimately can only be one, whether it is deep within there, whether it is the reality of the tiniest or the reality of the mightiest, because both are infinite. A Vedantin would say that because there is an infinity within me, which I experience through yoga, through the practical approach of yoga, and because there is an infinity out there, which is the only logical description of the universe out there, then both of these infinities must be one and the same. And the edge that is there, it's just a concept. It is just a way of looking at it, and our way of looking at it is being colored by that limitation, because the truth is that within that limitation is the infinite, and without that limitation is the infinite as well. So when a person comes to this realization, which is the logical outcome, it's just two ways of looking at reality to look at reality with a macrocosmic perspective, and then a microcosmic perspective. But we are looking at the same thing. This entire universe, today, thank God, we have such wonderful scientific understandings which help us again and again to make sense of these ideas. When we talk of Big Bang, we are told that this ever-expanding universe has come from an extremely tiny little spot. So that is where its origin is. So then we start to question if this edge, if this limitation which we are seeing, is this real, or is this just something that arose within that infinite? And if we consider this skin as the limitation, and we are talking about the infinity within and the infinity without, then this limitation is just a created thing. It just has been created at some point within a time period it was created, and one day it will be fully destroyed. Then the infinity within and the infinity without will again be one and the same when this limitation won't be there. So this limitation is a momentary thing that arises. When a person understands this, the death that we have been discussing in our previous class, the death of the limited sense of I, the death of the I sense, what is called the death of ego, the death that he's talking about is not something that is brought about. In other words, we don't kill our ego. We don't make an effort to kill it. But it naturally happens. Because when we understand really the infinity within, the Atman within, and Brahman without, the infinite without, and we realize that there is nothing that, it's the same description, it's the same entity, and there is nothing that can differentiate both, then the logical conclusion is that the infinity within is one and the same with the infinity without. And that is the four Mahavakyas, the four quintessential sentences of each one of the four Vedas, and each Mahavakya in slightly different words says the infinity within is one and the same with the infinity without. It requires a leap of faith. It requires a leap of faith. But this much faith, and only this much faith, is allowed and is required. And that is why a Vedantin would say that a person needs to have faith in this Mahavakya, in this final description, after he has experienced the infinity within and knows that there is infinity without. So then the death of ego, the death of that sense of I, is not something that is brought about, but it is something that happens, that naturally happens. Before that, a person makes a constant effort. A person, the yogic path of tremendous effort. You know, we have to make tremendous effort when we practice asana, pranayama, meditation. The yogic path is a path of tremendous effort. And after that, when that death of ego occurs, then there is no effort anymore, then everything happens naturally. And this is something that was implied by Dadhyang Atharvana in the 6th and the 7th verse. When we were studying the 6th and the 7th verse, I made a distinction, even though the description, can everybody hear me? Even back there? Yes. Back there you can hear me? Yeah. So the 6th verse and the 7th verse, they seem very similar. You know, even just the first, if we look at the first part, yet there is a radical difference in their description. In one case, he who sees, anupashyati. Pashyati means sees, and sees after also the word anu, which also has been used, by the way, by Patanjali in the Yoga Sutras, anu, which means after. After he has heard from his teachers, from his masters, he has faith in it, and he sees it that way. And therefore, he transcends aversion. He transcends hatred. This was the description of within the 6th verse. And the 7th verse, I discussed this when we were studying this difference between anupashyati, between seeing, between to see. After a person has heard and listened about it from the masters, such as we are listening it, that is one thing. And then the verb that has been used in the 7th verse is vijanataha, someone who has experienced it. The word vidyana, which means direct experience, which has nothing to do with the scriptures, which is not something that is dependent on the scriptures, that is dependent on anything that we have listened, but it is an inner experience. So this distinction, and I made clear that this refers to the two kinds of meditations that a person has. The first type of meditation is what in Vedanta we call upasana, which is based on faith. Just because a master has told us this all universe is one, so we meditate on that oneness without experience, just based on faith. It's also the same in our asana practice. Initially we don't know the depths. As a newcomer, we just have to we have to have faith in the teacher, that let him guide us through the path. We have to have faith, but only initially. It has to take us to we can't live with that faith for the rest of our life. Then it will become stagnant faith. So it's a stage, but it's not the goal. It's an essential state. And because faith sometimes particularly in human history, faith has harmed us so much that we are even not ready to benefit from what is the good faith. But that good faith is required. That is required. Even in yoga, Veda Vyasa in his commentary, he points that faith in one's master helps us and protects us and nourishes us like a beloved mother. It's our own faith, not we impose it sometimes on our father, on our master, and we start looking at him as our mother or father. No, it's our own faith. It's our own feeling, it's our own thing, but that helps us tremendously. But the point is not to remain there. The point is to develop further from upasana ultimately into what the Upanishads call nididhyasana, the type of meditation that arises, that makes an effort to experience what the master is experiencing it, and then from jnana to vijnana, from jnana, knowledge, to vijnana, intuitive understanding, deeper inner understanding. So this is the difference that he did. He in his description, which is very subtle, but it is there. These two verses. And something very, even further subtle in these two verses, I always used to struggle with these two verses when I was remembering the Upanishads by heart, when I was learning the Upanishads by heart, because those who have tried to learn passages by heart, they would know that if two passages are similar, then you always get confused. And you don't know, because they are similar, so you don't know which one. And even though I think I learned the Ishavasya Upanishad by heart in 91, 92, I used to struggle with these two verses until very recently, when I started teaching the Ishavasya Upanishad, and every time when I walk down, I recite it in my mind while I walk to here. So the practice came. And one day, but still sometimes I would get confused. Even here while reciting, I used to get confused. Then one day, something radically different dawned upon me within these two verses, that one verse, the first one, has a very active voice, grammatically, a very active voice, that he who sees all beings within himself. He who sees. So it's a very active voice. Yet in the other one, even though the description is the same, it's a very passive voice. When to the person of realization, all beings have become his very self. So he's not seeing it anymore, but it has become to him. That day, my confusion while reciting these two verses never came back, because I realized that even though they seem to be so similar, but they are radically so different with each other, the sixth one still has that sense of I within it, and the seventh one does not have that sense of agency, that sense of doership within that. So between the sixth and the seventh, the death of ego has occurred, which is what now he is explaining it in more words. So what is he now going to explain in the last few words, last few verses, last few mantras, is just what happened between the sixth, and it's just a further explanation, a further expansion of what he could not express there between the sixth and the seventh verse. And that is actually what creates the difference between religious and a mystic. When I use these two words, religious and mystic, or dharma and adhyatma, these two things, this is what I have in my mind. As long as we work on the basis of faith, we are a religious person, because we are having faith. That's a religious approach. As long as we have faith, and when it goes into the level of experience, then it becomes the mystical level. Then it becomes the level of adhyatma. One is a preparatory level, the second one is a deeper, more advanced level. And to further explain the difference between these two levels, there is a thought experiment that is quite well known to consciousness psychologists, modern psychologists who discuss consciousness. And when they speak about the difference between artificial intelligence and human intelligence, they make this thought experiment to show how both are tremendously different. They call it the Chinese room experiment. And what it means is that you have a closed room and you have a person sitting inside there. He's an English person, doesn't know any single word of Chinese, but he has a long list of instructions, huge piles of instructions, that if somebody sends in something written in Chinese characters, he will take it inside. He can refer to all the information that he has, and according to that, he would have to choose the answers which are there and give it back. Now the person outside has no idea about the person inside. And what he did, he wrote a question in Chinese, he sent it inside, and because the person inside has all the manuals, has all the descriptions, and therefore he could answer it very well, but without understanding anything. So the question was answered. So to the person outside, it might seem that the person within knows Chinese very well. But in reality, he does not know even a single word, single letter of Chinese language. So the same thing, this is the same thing about artificial intelligence, that because we feed in some information, then it brings up the answer, and we think that it is intelligent. Yet it is radically different, because the human intelligence has the capacity to understand it, and yet artificial intelligence doesn't have it. So to point out the importance of consciousness, they speak about this Chinese room experiment, and the same thing can be understood about the difference between a religious person and between a mystic. A religious person simply follows instructions, like that person within the Chinese room who has no idea, who does not understand Chinese language. What he's just doing, he's just following instructions. He has been given instructions that if a letter of this shape comes in, you have to choose a letter of this shape and send it out again. This is all he knows. So he lacks the understanding, yet his answer is perfect. And that is the problem with the religious person. His understanding is also perfect. What he is speaking about without experience is perfect. But it is like, and that is why, now just change this experiment a little bit and let the person send in a letter for which the person inside has no instructions. What will happen? He will be shocked. He will say, how can I answer? And he will be frightened from it, because he has no answer to that. And that is why a religious person is frightened from new ideas, from new thoughts. And yet, a mystic would say completely the opposite. Ano bhadraha kratavu yantu vishwataha, such as the ancient mystics have proclaimed, let beautiful thoughts come to me from the whole world. So that is again the difference that is there. It's a tremendous difference. It's a radical difference. Yet that difference lies there. And that difference, in the case of a mystic, occurs when this limited sense identity, when this limited understanding of one's own self is transcended. And that is why now in the next few mantras, in the next few verses, Sage Dadhyangatharvana, he starts speaking about death, the death of ego. Because only then this limited sense of I, which always created this distinction between I versus this, I versus you, I versus this distinction that, you see, we can blame religion, we can blame politics, we can blame anything we want to blame. But someone who has this distinction within themselves, he will always find an external mechanism, whether it is religious identity, whether it is ethical identity, whether it is linguistic identity, whether it is national identity, whether it is political identity, or identities based on states, cities, or whatever kind of identity. If the division is within here, then it will always be projected on something out there. So it has to be eradicated within. And as long as this limited sense of I is there, till then, ayam nijaha, this belongs to me, paro veti, this belongs to others. As long as the heart is small, as long as the sense of I is small, this will constantly happen. I'm just quoting the Upanishads. Mahopanishad, the great Upanishad. Ayam nijaha paro veti ganana laghu chetasam. Those who have a small heart, but udara charitanam tu. Those who have expanded their understanding, for them, vasudhaiva kutumbakam, this whole earth, this whole vasudha, this whole earth, and that is something that astronauts, when they go up there and when they have nothing else to do and just look back on the earth and see it as one single entity where there are no national boundaries, and then the kind of experience that they have, such as looking at your mother in her totality, and that what some now modern thinkers have called the overview effect. And if you want to know how powerful it is, then just Google it or go on YouTube and look at the descriptions. There is a beautiful video about overview effect where the astronauts are speaking about their experience, what they had when they look at the earth. That is when a person transcends the division. That is when Vasudha, the whole earth, becomes one family. And this family is not only limited to human beings, but it gets expanded to every living entity. This is what the Upanishadic masters, with the help of these teachings, of which yoga is the practical side of the Upanishadic teachings. The word yoga itself comes from the Upanishads. The whole idea of prana, pranayama, meditation, even asana has its expression in the most ancient teachings of the Upanishads. We don't have any other record of any other more ancient teaching than this. So that is where the Upanishads are taking us. Now, having said all this, I must also warn us against making a devil out of this idea of ego. And that is again the other extreme that I see in the spiritual world. We had this idea of the devil. As long as we were deeply religious, we were always God and devil. So it's like Atman and ego. We've replaced that idea of the devil with ego. That is how sometimes it seems to me, the way everybody is trying to kill their ego. Everybody is trying to kill their ego. I see it as something similar to the Romantic period. In the Romantic period, I think that was, as one period, it came closest to these ideas of universal oneness. And yet, during that period, one thing that was happening, that many people were killing themselves. Suicide became so common. Yes, particularly the Romanticas. It was quite common. I can't remember now one title that was written by a Romantic philosopher. So I'm bad sometimes in remembering names. Huh? Goethe. Huh? Okay, yeah, one of his books, and wherever it was translated in so many languages, people read it, and beautiful teachings. But what happened? It had to be banned because people started committing suicide because of that.
Sorrows of young Werther.
Sorrows of young Werther. Okay, that's the book. Yeah, I completely are just reading about it.
Goethe.
Yeah,
Goethe.
yeah, Goethe. Yes. Goethe is one of the greatest thinkers. And today sometimes when we talk of killing about ego, it seems that we are starting to understand it in the same way. Everybody is talking about killing one's ego. It's again the same thing happening on a subtle level. You know, Buddhist master come, ego is a bad thing. That's why ego. Vedantic masters from India, Neo-Vedantins from the West. Everybody is just as if always this dichotomy, good and bad. You know, ego is bad and an awareness of oneself is good. Always this. So everybody seems to be trying to kill their ego. And yet now let me tell you one thing which might come as a shock. But the practice of yoga actually is to strengthen one's ego. Not to kill one's ego. It is to strengthen one's ego. Like it strengthens our body, similarly, it also strengthens one's ego. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean when I speak about strengthening ego? Strengthening this sense of I, not pride. A person can be extremely humble. And what you understand as pride, as arrogance, as superiority complex, is actually not a strong ego, but it is the result of an extremely weak ego. But this is something that we will discuss in our next class. That is the other side of the story. We have talked a lot about, within the last few classes, we have talked a lot about killing the ego, about the death of ego, rather. And now, in the next session, we will talk about strengthening the ego and why is it important. First of all, we will have to analyze what we mean by the word ego. What does it really mean? Because it's just a word. Where do we find it within ourselves? And then, how does our yoga practice strengthen it, and why it is beneficial and actually required to strengthen it? This is something we will discuss in our next session.
Don't let us hang like that until the next session.
You know, when there are sequels in
people are more interested.
and when there are sequels, there is always a little bit towards the end that will pull you back. Why should I lose my listeners?
Strengthening the self-confidence.
Yes. Yeah. The deepest self, the Atman, is ever strong. That does not even require to be strengthened. We actually derive our strength, all our strength we derive from that deep inner self. Atmana vindate viryam, the Upanishads, they say, from where does a person virya? Virya means inner strength. From where does a person derive it? He derives it from within. But ego is a tool, and that too needs to be strengthened because it's a tool. But I will leave it there.
Do they use the same word ego in Sanskrit?
In Sanskrit, it's you see, in English.
Does it mean the
In
same?
English, we start now using ego as an equivalent to egoism or
Yes.
egotism or
Yeah.
pride or arrogance. However, ego, which is a Latin word, is actually, it just means I. This inner reference point which is there. This inner reference point which is there, from which all thoughts, all words, and all activities arise. So that is what we understand by the word ego. And yet, it is a limiting entity. It is like that limitation, like that inner edge which we have created, because action requires that limited edge. So, but we will discuss this in greater detail in the next session. any thoughts related to what we discussed today? Or any questions?
Can I say something?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Can call the ahankara or ego.
Yes, yeah, actually, I did not finish answering her question. Yes, ahankara is ego. Yes, because ahankara actually means I sense. Aham means I, and kara means the sense, the feeling, ahankara, the constant saying of aham. In Vedanta, the word ahankara is used, and again, even with Hindi language, the problem is that when Vedanta uses the word ahankara, it uses it in a very different meaning than to a Hindi-speaking person for whom ahankara also just means pride, arrogance. For a Hindi-speaking person, ahankara, ye bahut ahankari hai, bahut ghamandi hai. But Vedanta does not use ahankara in that sense. Or when Patanjali uses the word asmita, when he uses the word asmita, he uses it in that word, I amness, this sense. So Patanjali's word in the yogic tradition, the technical term is asmita. In the Vedantic traditions, the technical term is ahankara, for which we use in English, we use the Latin equivalent, ego. But since again, like the Sanskrit word ahamkara is misunderstood in modern Hindi language, or the Latin word ego is misunderstood now in common English language. So similarly, therefore, Vidya Bhaskar, he suggested recently that let us translate ahankara as I sense. That is a very literal translation. I sense. That's all. Just I sense. Not license, I sense. But it's easy to remember. License, I sense.
I was going to say something, but I had kind of like in a...
Yeah, so that I don't know then how we will be able to pass to everybody, but need a codeless.
As you were, okay, just correct me if I'm mistaken. In the beginning of the class, you said you were talking about the natural physical death, and with the natural physical death, the ego, not as a bad or good thing, but the ego naturally dies.
Naturally,
right?
Yes.
But I had an epiphany because Ushaji in class often tells us that yoga goes against nature. And, that can create a little bit of a conflict because we think, wait a minute, it's nice to go with nature. But being as she's the guru, we say, okay, you trust her, as you were saying. You trust the teacher. No, you trust the teacher until you get it like 100%. You have that faith and you go with it. But now as you were speaking, I had like a flash. So the ego naturally dies with the physical death. That's nature. That's the natural death. But what we try to do as yogis, yoginis, and Vedantins is to let, and I'm not talking about the ego, now you corrected beautifully how the ego is not a bad thing, but the ego, we try to let the ego go before the natural death.
Yes.
So that is also going against nature, very clearly.
Yes.
Right.
It is going against the limited nature, and it is going in accordance to the infinite nature. So it's like going against the limited one, and that is beautiful because that is exactly what allows us to transcend the fear of death.
Yeah.
Because we fear most to lose our limitation, our limited sense of I. This is what we fear most, to lose this. And when a person has transcended it, when a person is no more attached to it, then why should a person be frightened? Any other thoughts? Shao, you have anything to say to my mathematical ideas?
Was great.
Because this is inspired by our discussions which we had last year. Whatever I said today.
Mathematician Shao.
Yes,
Shao. Oh, you're the mathematician. Say something.
Because you were here, so I was talking about
Yeah.
this.
Numbers.
The first thing I learned from my mathematical professor is the infinity of the numbers.
Yeah.
And the first I know it's true because it has been proved, but
Yeah.
I don't understand it. After 3 years, I could understand there's no limitation.
Yeah.
They're all equal
They are
at
equal.
infinity level.
Yeah.
They're equal.
Yeah. So basically what he's trying to say is that initially when his teacher taught him, he had to take it as a faith that yes, all numbers are infinite. But then after 2-3 years of studying and thinking and analyzing, he realized that that is the truth. Epiphany.
So that is same like the verse 6 and the verse 7.
Yeah.
The seer, the one who sees,
Yeah.
and the one who realizes.
The one who realizes.
So,
Yes.
the one,
They can't hear you.
so the one who sees and the one who realizes. So then what is the infinity between these two finites?
Not one who realizes, but to whom the realization occurs. That is the Sanskrit word that has been used there. Sarvam Atmaiva Abhut, to whom everything has become. So the distinction that I tried to make was that on one side there is one person who is trying to see it that way, and then on the other hand is someone to whom the realization comes. So that is the moment of epiphany.
So that is effort and effortlessness.
Exactly. Even in asana we have, on one side we make a lot of effort, and then prayatna shaithilya. When Patanjali speaks about asana, then it is prayatna shaithilya, effortlessness.
So when you go deeper inwards, I all the time say, deeper you go, there is so much space created. You go deeper and deeper. What did I say? When you sit silently before the prayer, I said, open the chest, penetrate this small area. How big it is, like a castle. The more deeper you go, the bigger it becomes. It's also the bindu.
The bindu.
The Shri Yantra.
Yes.
The point, the more you penetrate
The spot in the Shri
small
Yantra.
spot, how deep it goes, how it goes in infinity.
Yes, infinity.
And that's the oneness.
Yes. And that is why now you can understand the difference between knowing and the difference between being revealed.
Yeah.
And the Vedic teachings, the Vedic masters don't say, we have known the truth. That is the meaning of the word rishi. When we use the word rishi is not rishi, it is derived from the root rish, which means to know. And so grammatically it means a wise man. That's all what the word rishi is used. However, it is used for the prophets of the Vedas only, which means, technically speaking, a person cannot have a rishi after approximately 600 BC. Because only before that, those whose teachings were collected in the form of the Vedic literature, they are called the rishis. Now, when the Vedic teachings describe a rishi, what they say, Swayambhu Abhya. Now, this is the description of the Vedas themselves. Who is a rishi? They say that Swayambhu Abhya Narshat Tad Rishinam Rishitvam, which means that when the Swayambhu, when the self-evident truth approached them, they became rishis. Because we don't even, in that humbleness, we don't even have the capacity, and that is devotion, that is surrender, that we don't have the capacity even to approach it. But the only capacity we have is to open our doors so that it can enter us. That is when Ramakrishna Paramahansa, he used to say that there are two types of people. One is like a monkey child of a monkey clinging to its mother, and the other one is like a kitten being held by its mother. That is the difference. When Patanjali speaks of Ishvara Pranidhana, when Patanjali speaks of pranidhana. Forget the idea of Ishvara, just pranidhana, because the Buddha does not speak about Ishvara, but he still speaks of pranidhana, of surrender. This is what he means. When a person opens up, then we don't make an effort to know the truth, because the truth is all around us. It is deep within us. We just open our windows so that the wind and the sun can enter, fresh air can enter. That's all. So the only effort that we need, we cannot go and kindle the sun so that it can enlighten our room. We cannot make the wind blow. This is happening naturally. The only thing we can do, we can just open our windows. We can, first of all, I think we have to create a window. And that is what I understand by strengthening one's ego. First of all, we create a window. And then when we have created it, then we have to open it. So that the wind, fresh air, the sunshine can enter. That is all what we can do. And that is all what yoga is about. Therefore, Rishi is someone to whom it was revealed, not someone by whom it was known. That is the difference that we make when we use the word Rishi in the Vedic terminology. So, Rishi, that is what a Vidwan, a scholar. Vidwan is a scholar. And Rishi that is the difference. If there are words in Sanskrit, there is always a very subtle difference. Mostly there is always a subtle difference between various words. Any? Yes?
With surrendering, it seems that you have to take a lot of pain and sometimes suffering at all levels. Like what we do in asanas, if you do all the actions, tremendous pain, you stand in the asana. It seems it has to be that way, but does it have to be that way?
Yes, yes. I'm struggling there myself. Actually, in my previous class, when I was here, I really admire each one of you. I really admire. That's all what I can say. And with already so much effort that each one of you is putting into it, I'm sure things will happen very, very fast. I think what Guruji used to say, no pain, no gain.
And it is true that when you really work hard, when you really go through all, you have the most beautiful Shavasya afterwards. It's true or not?
No, one thing what I have learned from Usha ma'am in the last class, that you have to break your body to build yourself.
Yeah.
And when you apply this in your practice, like which I apply in my practice, that really, really helps me.
Yes.
You have to break your body to build yourself.
Yes, and exactly what he said is because we have these different levels. We have the level of prana, we have the level of the mind, we have the level of ego, we have all these different levels. Everywhere the same thing applies. That a person really, if we understand what we mean by this, we understand what we mean by the
That's
others.
how
Yes.
yoga. Oh, sorry.
That's how yoga, yes.
Sometimes it's like life also. Sometimes from
So
pain.
I was going to say.
Yeah, sometimes from pain, not just physical pain. From pain, you break those patterns. You are forced to do this. And
Yes.
sometimes you need the pain in order to help you to do it in a way.
Yes.
And it's like you were saying, you do, and sometimes you really notice things are changing.
Yeah.
But-
We do, and then things happen.
But when you're the yoga asanas, I believe they teach. Of course, they teach you how to deal with your everyday life. And after a while, once you start tuning into your body and then to your mind and to your heart, then you tune in also to the universe, and you'll find that the answers come to you a lot quickly, and it doesn't always have to be that difficult. It doesn't always have to be such a struggle. You get a sense of something.
Yes.
I think we all call it, we women call it that little voice in our heads. You know, we say the sixth sense, you know, we have this kind of an instinct. If you learn to listen to it and trust it without asking any questions, you just go and listen. Something, it's like that something. Something is telling me to do this, you know? If you start doing it, actually the time, it becomes less and less and less and less until you become in tune with that voice, you know? And then the suffering and the pain, I think, becomes less dramatic or less traumatic. There's a tuning in of, and that yoga asanas definitely help us to understand.
Sthira Sukhamasana. Yes, Sthira Sukhamasana, yes. But it requires a lot of practice it requires a lot of pain. Yes. Otherwise you have sukha in the beginning and then dukkha at the end. So the best thing is to take dukkha initially, you know, with understanding, then we have sukha at the end. What Vedanta would say to this from a very Vedantic perspective or yogic perspective, Patanjali says the same thing, that as a human being, we are a bunch of approximately equal amount of good and bad impressions. You know, both are there within us. And a person has to work to reduce the harmful impressions and strengthen the good ones. And this is a painful process. But if that pain is taken on ourselves with understanding, because we do it with understanding, we can stop. Two things happen. We can stop when it becomes unbearable, you know, because we are taking upon it with an understanding. We have no escape. Certain amount of pain, as an idea of karma, certain amount of pain in our life we have to experience. Now we can leave the nature to make us to experience it, or we can make an effort and experience it in our life with understanding. If we experience it in our life with understanding, then we can stop where it becomes unbearable. But if the nature will force us to experience that amount of pain, then we can't stop. Then we don't have a choice. Then we just will have to experience, and we will have to go through it.
And that I mean we go against the nature. This is what I mean.
Yeah.
After a while, I think when you've realized in your life that if you didn't listen to that initial whatever it was, and you just go take the other, you know, you have a choice of doors, you take the easy way, and after a while you have so much pain, then if you think back on it, you think, wait a minute, I kind of knew that wasn't the way to go. And once you start to realize that, and you realize, wait a minute, it's not out there, I can control this, it's in me, then you start to realize, okay, I'm not sure why I shouldn't go that way, but something's telling me not to, I'm going to go the other way where, you know, like as you were saying, you start to control it. And then, because when nature makes you pay for something, it hurts. It will kick you. Unless, but if you know it from the beginning, then you accept it, and then it's less.
Yes.
It takes a lot of pain to understand that.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry.
I want to say, because what is the meaning of the yoga says? Prepare yourself to save yourself against the nature.
Yeah. Don't go with it.
But see, the thing is, we hear a lot about, you know, being with the nature and, you know, being like the nature. And, you know, that's why I was saying that it could create a little bit of, you know, conflict. Not conflict, but you have to really think about it. It's not something I think that we grasp immediately, because we are told to be like nature and be natural and be you know?
Yeah.
It has to, but now I understand.
There is a beautiful, let me end with a short story that there is there, which sometimes the mystics used to speak about. If we need to suffer, we will suffer even in the greatest of luxuries. We know this today. So there is a story by a mystic. he describes a prince who was raised in extreme luxuries. And one day he jumped out of his bed and said, my God, there is a thorn. And then his servants looked at it, and there was actually a red spot. And it was, he said, tremendously painful, tremendously painful. They said, what could this be? He's sleeping on seven mattresses. What is each? They looked. The first mattress, there is nothing. Second mattress, nothing. Third mattress, nothing. Then on the seventh mattress, there was the hair of a goat, which was sticking up like this, and that is what was hurting him, and that is what was causing excruciating pain to him. Now, this is an extreme example, but this is exactly what happens when we pursue the path of luxuries. When we go into the extreme. This is just an example. It doesn't matter whether this happened or not, but it makes us aware what happens when we pursue the path of extreme luxuries. Even the smallest thing, and that's why yoga gives us that strength, that titiksha, that what is the English word for titiksha? Titiksha. I always keep on forgetting this word again and again. The capacity to bear tolerance. But tolerance is not the word that I'm searching. Endurance, yes. Endurance, yes. And that is what, because somehow this natural body cannot remain where it is. Either it keeps on falling. If we don't do anything, it keeps on falling. And if we do something, then we have to keep on raising it. We can't remain where we are. That's not possible. That's just against the nature, because everything is constantly moving. So either we have to make positive effort to lift ourselves again and again, or we just let loose and let it fall down. Then what happens is that we fall into luxuries. Pain will follow us there as well. Then even the smallest thing, because the smallest thing will cause us so much problem. So we have to keep that balance there. That madhyama marga, we have to create it. And that is again something that yoga, the middle way. The middle way is not the way of a lazy man. The middle way is what Buddha was struggling against, were people who were giving extreme suffering to themselves. So then he pulled those who went into that extreme to this side. But naturally, generally, people fall into this other extreme of luxury from which yoga pulls us away. So that is where even the 17th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, when the Yoga Sutra speaks of tapas, austerity, when Krishna speaks about it, when the Upanishads use the word tapasa anashakena, the type of austerity which is not destructive in nature, this is what they mean. The type of austerity that is balanced, the type of austerity that gives us a sense of lightness. And that is exactly what happens. That is why asana is a form of tapas. It is asana, pranayama is a form of tapas. It is a type of tapas. Because we voluntarily take pain upon ourselves with understanding. With understanding. That's the key thing, with understanding. And that's where a teacher helps us to distinct between the harmful pain and the good pain. Even within asana practice, there is a harmful pain which needs to be avoided. And a teacher helps us to find it, to find the difference between the harmful pain and the beneficial pain. Okay, so let us conclude with this prayer for the universal well-being, universal happiness. सर्वे भवन्तु सुखिनः सर्वे सन्तु निरामयाः सर्वे भद्राणि पश्यन्तु मा कश्चित् दुःखभाग् भवेत्। ॐ शान्तिः शान्तिः शान्तिः। Thank you very much.